City parking. Perhaps the only thing more frustrating to me than Boston traffic is Boston parking. It's war out there. And yet, as Stephanie Leyden tells us, developers across the city are pushing for residential buildings with fewer or no parking spaces. Really?
Like many Boston neighborhoods, once humble Roslindale is going upscale. Case in point, this long vacant building is being transformed into a high-end restaurant. It's flanked on both sides by new apartments. All 43 units were leased almost as soon as they were built, despite the fact many of them have no parking.
Whether it's downtown or in an outer neighborhood such as Roslindale or Dorchester, folks are not looking for parking anymore.
Developer Bev Gallup says what people want these days is easy access to buses and trains.
A lot of the people that move here, the first thing they do is say, "Take my car, please." You know, they are tired of spending 2 hours in and 2 hours out.
And some say the change in how we get around has led to something almost unimaginable: too many parking spaces.
There are parking spaces on the surface, there are parking spaces down below.
Mark Drayson runs the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and he says at this Malden high-rise, nearly 1/4 of the spaces go unused. He actually sent his staff here to count them.
Generally, our hours are between 12:30 and 4 a.m.
They conducted pre-dawn surveys across Malden and in Everett, Chelsea, Melrose, and Arlington. On average, residential lots were only 3/4 full.
We are overbuilding our parking spaces all over Greater Boston, and it's time for that to change.
Eliminate unneeded spaces, and you can do what Bev Gallo did in Roslindale: create more places for people to live.
We actually have units there that could have been parking spaces, but we turned them into 2 loft units that leased right away.
More housing, fewer cars, sounds like a win-win, but there may be a cost.
It's the concept that we can just skip parking that allows them to build monstrous rental cash cows that get only inhabited by transients.
Eva Webster is a longtime community activist, and she's been fighting a plan here in Allston to turn this building into an apartment complex with parking for only about half the units. She believes it will attract short-timers to a neighborhood she says needs more people willing to put down roots, families and homeowners, people likely to want a car.
If you have people who are here only for a year or two, living in a tiny studio, and they are not planning to spend their life here, they don't get engaged in civic issues, and it makes it much harder for the rest of us to make sure that this is a real neighborhood.
She worries the trend to reduce parking will encourage the kind of urban density that will make Allston more like downtown Boston or even Manhattan. As the city evolves amid unprecedented growth, the direction it takes may well be determined by whether or not there's a place to park.
Stephanie Leyden joins me now. Stephanie, that was great. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
They say fewer people, I hear them say it, are owning cars. Remember when Tom Menino said, "The car is no longer king"?
Like only he could.
Is there really less car ownership?
Well, this was my question. We hear this trend. Young people are delaying getting their licenses, delaying getting cars. So I asked the Department of Transportation, can you get us some numbers? And it's pretty significant. They pulled some numbers. 2010, the number of people who had cars garaged in Boston was 238,000. 6 years later, July of this year, it was down to 184,000. That's a difference, Jim, of 50,000 cars in 6 years.
That is absolutely huge.
And Mark Drayson over at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council pulled some numbers for me. Just regionally, the towns that ring Boston, whether it's Cambridge or Milton or Melrose, all of those communities also show a drop in car ownership. So there is some data to
So is the goal of the advocates here, is there hope the car goes the way of the answering machine? That's not the goal, is it, or no?
Well, not the goal and not likely to happen. I mean, you may remember a couple of years ago, there was a development in Boston near North Station called Lovejoy Wharf, and it got a lot of press.
We talked about the mayoral debate we did right here at GBH.
There you go.
But go ahead,
no parking, and we're trying to be Manhattan here in Boston. But that's turned out to be somewhat of an exception to the rule. I mean, these new developments do have parking. Maybe some of the smaller one-bedroom units don't, but these luxury developments with the penthouse views they have parking. And I talked to a realtor in Boston who dug up, actually, the most expensive parking space in Boston. It was on Beacon Hill. Do you want to guess what it went for?
I actually know. I read the story. $250,000.
$650,000 for a
You
parking
want to hear
space.
something really embarrassing? The second most expensive space was bought by a friend of mine.
I thought it was going to be yours.
She's a fabulous person. It's a great family. Stephanie, it was a great piece. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Jim.